Lexi. Welcome to my first ever video on this channel. I have a TikTok under the name Newly Nova. If that's news to you, now you know. And over there I normally do vlogs and nonsense kind of talking content. And I just want a place where I can ramble on for a little bit longer and still have it be cute. So here I am. Thanks for being here. I thought a pretty good place to start on BookTube would be to talk about some of my current all-time favorite books. These are my feral 5-star reads, okay? All of these, in their own ways, shot me directly into the stratosphere, never to be seen again. They're my favorites. They're important to me. Okay, some disclaimers. Something that you will learn immediately in this list is that I am still kind of a toddler when it comes to getting back into reading. Like, I am a little baby in a big world, and there are just so many colors around me all of the time, and I don't know what to do with them. I was a classic case of like Percy Jackson enjoyer turned burnt out gifted kid, never to read another book or turn another page ever again, following A Tale of Two Cities my freshman year of high school. If you're here, you probably know how it is. Anyways, I've since reformed, but I've only been reading for fun again for about the past 2 years, and there's really only so much that you can get through in that time. Especially if, like me, you love drama. Because with a handful of exceptions, normally all of the books that I read are books that people are talking about in some capacity. So I don't claim to be some kind of like wizard when it comes to recommending these little nuggets of gold that you've never heard of before. You're probably not going to get that from me. What I can provide you is good takes on which popular books are hits and which are skips. With that, I am a big mood reader. Like, I feel like people say that sometimes when what they mean is that they're bouncing between different romance tropes and throwing in a little fantasy novel in there sometimes, or like a thriller. I read like every genre except for middle grade and children's books, and not a ton of like really dense informational nonfiction, and also not a ton of classics. But even for all of those, like sometimes, I don't know, it like depends on the vibes, you know? Basically, I have the attention span of like a little baby cricket, and the only way for me to remember any of the books that I read is to like embrace chaos and make sure I'm sandwiching them between books that are as different as you can possibly imagine from what I've just read, so that way they all occupy like distinctive spaces in my memory. And that just means I read broadly much more often than I read deeply. Like, I don't consider myself to be even close to an expert on any genre. This is very much for like the jack of all trades girlies out there, and it's going to be a little bit all over the place as a result, but that's okay. That's okay. Anyways, I say all of that so I don't get like mobbed by people who think I have bad taste. But also, let's be honest, I have like full faith in myself, especially for people who have similar lore to me. So if you want to be hot and cool, here are some books that'll get you there. These are not in order except for the last one, which is the best one. So let's go. My Dark Vanessa. The one thing about me is that I just love to suffer. Crying? Ugh, yes. If you can make my cold, dead heart feel things, then I probably love the book. Everything basically that I'm talking about today is going to have trigger warnings. So I'm just warning you once right here en masse that if you are worried about anything, you should look it up. I'm not responsible for the emotional pain that you'll be put through if you don't, okay? So this book tore me in half. I love, love, love stories that explore healing and trauma and the non-linear process that is reconnecting to yourself after your life is changed forever. And that's what this is. So this is a book that's told in 2 parts, past and present. Both parts follow Vanessa at different points in her life. Part A tells the story of her high school experience as she is groomed into a relationship with her much older high school English teacher. And part B tells the story of her recovery and therapy as an adult woman many, many years later who's grappling with her abuser's death and the overall impact that he had on the trajectory of her life. Vanessa realizes as an adult that she's framed her abuse her entire life as some kind of like fairy tale romance in an effort to preserve some of the agency that was taken away from her by her abuser. To do anything other than that would have been an act of self-destruction for her. But ultimately, doing that has shackled her so much to her trauma that she's completely unable to move past it. This is a book that definitely could have come across as exploitative, or if it's not exploitative, maybe preachy or overwritten in the name of presenting kind of the opposite message. But somehow it's like not either of those things. I just cannot speak highly enough of the feeling that is captured in this book of how difficult it is to walk through this world when you're forced to distort the truth of your own history in order to like survive day to day. I don't know what else I need to tell you. It is just such a moving story. We're starting off strong. 7 days in June. So I'm something of a gremlin when it comes to romance books. Even with stories that are like absurdly hyped and cute, there is always a 50% chance that I'm just not going to get it. Like, I'll read them and it'll be kind of fun, and then they're over and I never think about them ever again. I'm not out here like frothing at the mouth like I'm promised, okay? And I feel like part of that is a lot of authors will skimp out on character in the name of fleshing out like the dynamic between characters. And that just never works for me. Like, I need to like both people as individuals in order to like the relationship and to like the fact that they've fallen in love. If I don't, I'll be bored and I'm not gonna believe that they should be together, and that's the cold hard truth. Even with that said, I read like a whole heap of romance novels, and I like a lot of them, and I love some of them, and 90% of the time I go on to never think a single thought about any of them ever again. That is not true with this book. I don't know what Tia put in between these pages, but dude, it's good stuff. So this book follows Shane and Eva. They are both authors. Shane writes sad boy prize-winning literary fiction, and Eva writes this kind of cult classic fantasy erotica series. And when they were in high school, they had this one tumultuous, life-changing week together where they fell in love and did a bunch of things, and then for reasons that are obviously explored in the book, they end up never talking again. But get this, ever since that week, they have been writing to each other through the characters in their books. And in the modern day, Tia is a single mom with this like really cool, very slay daughter, and she ends up running into Shane unexpectedly, and it dredges up all of these emotions from the time that they were together when they were much younger. And everything changes for both of them, and it's so much better than you could possibly imagine. This is a second chance romance, which is not my usual trope, but when I say that she is cooked to perfection, I am so serious, okay? I found this book to be like legitimately laugh out loud funny. Like that never happens. Normally for me, rom-com humor is either like cringe or has me kind of blowing air out of my nose in appreciation for whatever joke that the author was trying to make. I fully laughed like more than a few times reading this book. But more than that, I thought that the drama here is like immaculate. It is heavier than your average romance novel for sure. Like there is a lot that both of these characters have been through in their past and are still going through and dealing with the consequences of to this day. And I don't know, it's so well done. If you have someone in your life that is a romance downer, this is the one that you should have them read to make them develop an appreciation of what this genre can do. The Office of Historical Corrections. I was recommended this short story collection completely on a whim by a random clerk at a bookstore in Savannah when I was there visiting, and to date is the best recommendation I have ever received from a stranger in the wild. So this is me trying to be the stranger that gives you that same gift. If you're a fan of short stories already, this is definitely for you, but even if you're not, this was one of my first ever short story collections, and I loved it so much that I ended up buying tabs for the first time and like annotating this, which really is not something I do very often for books, but there were just like so many quotes that I loved in here, I genuinely could not help myself. This collection has 6 short stories and 1 novella, and it follows mostly Black and multiracial characters as they experience like a lot of different emotions, like grief, love, trauma, a bunch of stuff. I mean, it's hard to describe a collection of like completely disparate stories in a way that captures all of them, so I'm just gonna give you like a few examples, okay? One of the stories follows a white girl who wears a Confederate flag bikini in a photo that ends up going super viral on the wrong side of the internet, and she ends up getting censured by her campus. But the way that the story is written also completely humanizes her, even and especially when she's being like absurdly awful and ignorant. It's really good. There's another one where a woman who is trying to reinvent herself and move across the country ends up being the sole caretaker of this like abandoned little boy who's left on a bus with just her basically as a potential guardian. And she builds this like really strong bond with him, but is also still involved in some crime from her past. And the story forces her to reckon with her identity, her future, and also whether or not to return this kid to a family who she believes clearly is not looking out for his best interests, even if it might be the right thing to do. I cried. I was not well reading that one. And then the titular novella follows a woman who works at the Office of Historical Corrections, which is kind of like a government fact-checking agency. She is like the only Black woman on staff, and she's always sent out as a result by her agency to anything that might be like racially sensitive. And she ends up being sent to investigate the mystery and the truth behind this sign in this tiny place in Wisconsin, in a town where this Black man who was thought to have been killed by this mob many, many years ago might not have actually died. And the novella is like such an interesting investigation of truth and like race politics and white supremacy, and also a nosedive into really complicated female friendships. And it's wonderful, and those are probably my favorites in this collection, but like they're all good. There are no duds in my opinion. Danielle, the author, just has such like a beautiful command of language, but also writes in a way that's very approachable and never alienates her readers, which to me is a balance of skills that I have like the utmost respect for. And I don't know, okay? Read it. Dude, just trust me. It's so good. It's wonderful. I loved it. Legendborn. I love how much YA has changed since when I was reading as a teenager. I feel like there's so much more trust now that authors have in their audiences to be able to handle like legitimately mature themes that ultimately make the entire genre much more true to the real world, and also valuable for what I think should be a primary goal of reading fiction, which is just to develop a greater sense of empathy with the world around you. Anyways, with that said, a lot of YA also makes me feel old sometimes. Like there are just absolutely things I read where I'm just like, okay, that's cringe, that's too far, I am no longer at all in the target audience for this. And I guess that's just the price you pay when you read YA as a 22-year-old woman. But there are a couple of series that I really believe are just standout pieces of media, regardless of their target audience. And for me, my favorite among those is the Legendborn series. I don't know what to say that has not already been said like a million times, but I'm gonna try to convince you if you're still somehow a holdout on this one, okay? So this series follows Bree, who is a 16-year-old currently going to UNC on kind of like an early college high school program, and she's still very much in the throes of grief over the recent passing of her mom, who died pretty close to when she moved into UNC. And her first week on campus, she's kind of in like the wrong place at the wrong time when she finds herself in the middle of a monster attack. And it turns out that there is like this whole warrior society that is composed of the direct descendants of King Arthur, Merlin, and the Round Table, which is already really cool. But Bree also realizes when she meets them that one of these Merlin wizard people was directly involved in the death of her mom. And she ends up kind of like undercover investigating them while also dealing with her grief and building these really strong, authentic bonds with the people who are around her. This is such a testament to the potential that YA has as a genre. Like the momentum that the plot has in this book, insane. It is interesting, it's serious, it's often dark, and it's like legitimately shocking in all of the ways that the plot kind of twists and turns around you. Also, the representation in this series is like insane on all levels, but somehow none of the characters feel feel tokenized at all, which is not common. And I'm still looking for a series that's going to make me feel like this again. Like, my apologies to you, I guess, that this is not completed yet, but you know, that means you get to be a part of the moment, okay? Dude, it is so good. Know my name. This is as close as I think I will ever get to saying that a book should be required reading for all human citizens of this planet. It's a memoir by Chanel Miller, who was the survivor in the big Stanford assault case a few years ago now. She wrote this incredibly poignant viral victim impact statement for that trial. And ultimately she ended up kind of expanding that and telling a much more complete story in a full book about not only how the assault changed the trajectory of her life, but more than that, how she was constantly re-traumatized by a justice system that was operating in a way that really did not care about whether or not she would actually be okay. And seemingly much more empathy for the defendant, who ended up getting charged with like the most pathetic sentence in the history of the world. And I don't know, I really just wish I could download this book into the mind of every man and also the complicit women around me all of the time. Even after Me Too and a lot of conversations about how we talk about violence against women, I am still constantly disgusted about the ways that gender violence is discussed around me and by the media. No, it's a cold take, perhaps the coldest ever take. I can't imagine that anybody watching this video actually disagrees with me, but I am so dismayed all of the time by how little consequences there are for perpetrators of these crimes. It's something that's personal to me and that I look for in fiction and nonfiction. And I just think that this memoir is the best on the market when it comes to capturing that feeling of complete shattering, followed by the terrifying reality that now you have to pick up the pieces. You have to find a way to still have hope in a world that broke like glass around you when you needed it to work the most. You'll probably cry reading this. I know I did, but you should read this. The people that you love should read this. The people that you hate should read this, even though they probably won't. Like, it's just one of those kinds of books for me. Betty. This is the newest addition to this list. I read this summer, and I was kind of a historical fiction skeptic before I picked this up. I really enjoyed the only other family saga that I've read in my life, Homegoing, which I picked up last year. But other than that, I don't often reach for books that take place in the past. It's just not normally something that like piques my interest. But I am so glad that I decided to give this one a go, because oh my god, it is so good. I've said it before, but this is my little life. Like, this is a book that is heavy. So this follows a girl named Betty, who is one of 8 siblings growing up in a biracial Cherokee home. The era is like the 1950s and 60s, and most of this book is just all of the sad things that happen inside of this family. They face a ton of violence, both from outside, like directed towards them, but also between members of the family towards each other. Like, the call comes from inside the house more often than not. But what I think is truly exceptional about this book is that despite how sad the entire story is, like basically from page 1 to page 500 or whatever, like it is not a happy story. A lot of tragedies happen. The tone of the book stays so jubilant and hopeful and kind of revelatory of especially the impact that the dad in this family had on the lives of all of his kids. It is abundantly clear that everybody in the family really looks up to him as this symbol of compassion and wisdom, even despite all of the violence that's happening in their lives. And it ends up just being this beautifully written, heartbreaking story that tells the truth in a way that I think is difficult to do without it feeling exploitative. But my favorite thing about this book is that the author wrote it about her mom. Like, it's a semi-biographical look at her mom's actual life. And it's filled with so much love for this girl who endured and came out of this and grew up into this like resplendent, beautiful woman that ends up the mom of this author, you know? Like, that's so special. And it gives this story a realism that underscores all of the things I've already said about it feeling true and hopeful even at its lowest points. And I loved this, and it's my favorite book of the year so far, and I want to read all of the family sagas that have ever been written now. And I cried like a little baby in a public airport reading this book, and honestly, there's basically nothing more that I can ask for than that, because that's criminal behavior. You only get that out of me when you're writing something truly awesome. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. What is there to say about this book? Oh,
it's so good.
Oh! Okay, like however wonderful you think this is, cube it. Cube it again. You're almost there. Cube it again. Is that enough for you? Like, do I have to keep explaining myself? I am rabid for this. So this is a story about Sam and Sadie. They meet when they're kids in a hospital, kind of 80s, 90s vibes. Sadie's there visiting her sister who's battling cancer, and Sam is getting a ton of surgeries on his foot after he was in a car crash that also killed his mom. And the two of them end up bonding over a shared love for like classic video games, only to end up falling out of touch for many years. Fast forward, and they end up meeting again in college. And they reconnect, they make up, and they end up deciding to design a video game of their own. And the rest of this book follows like a massive chunk of the rest of their lives as they continue making video games together, kind of experiencing success and failure and falling in and out of each other's lives. The two of them are described by the book as often in love and never lovers. And one of the things that I like best about the story is it is absolutely a deconstruction of whatever presupposition you have about what the relationship will be based on the description that I just gave you. And it's also like so much better than I could possibly capture through just talking about it with you right now. Dude, just trust me. At its core, what this book is a meditation on the creative experience and the intimacy of like baring your soul soul in being creative with somebody else to make something together. It's about the poignancy of friendship. It's about how complicated your relationships can be with the people that you love most in the world, and the reality that those relationships will evolve and change and come and go throughout the lifespan. And that is all against the backdrop of like a really interesting story about some nerds making some video games together, which, as someone who grew up playing a lot of video games with my brother as a kid, carried a seriously large amount of nostalgic value for me. And okay, not to like gatekeep real quick, but I read this book the month it came out, okay, before it had gotten any of the awards or acclaim that eventually would come for it. And I sat her down and I finished it and I cried, and I knew for a fact that I was experiencing something for the first time that would matter to me for the rest of my life. I have never felt that way before about a book to that extent. It was like a seriously loaded experience. I don't know. I love this so much. I have forced everyone in my life who cares about me to read this book. This includes my dad, who basically only reads like David Baldacci political thrillers. I don't know. I've just never been touched like this by a book before or since. I turn to her in good times and in bad. Like, I actually get inspiration from like flipping through my little annotated copy and like finding a quote that will make me feel better about whatever I'm experiencing. I have Marks living in my head at all times, constantly giving me feedback on my words and my deeds. Sam and Sadie are both kind of unlikable characters. Like, they make bad decisions, they don't communicate very well, they have real substantial flaws, and to me that is why they feel like such real substantial people. It was so easy for me to just emotionally invest myself in this book, and the payoff was just sublime. I liked everything about it, even the things with the structure that some people critique, I thought enhanced the story. I don't know, there's like nothing like it. And that's that. Those are my favorite books. They might change in the future. I'm not a betrothed woman, okay? Please engage. Like, comment, subscribe. You know the drill. I would like to keep doing this. I don't have anything more to say. Bye.